Hello and welcome to Crumbs and Doilies HQ. Now a few weeks ago I posted a video about how to get the perfect cupcake and I went through a number of troubleshooting things, how not to do it and how to definitely do it right, and you guys seem to really enjoy that. So I'm going to do another masterclass today on how to create the perfect sponge. So I'm going to give you my basic sponge recipe and how to get it just right, and then I'm also going to give you some ideas on how to adapt it so you can make different flavours. Now this recipe I'm going to start with is for an 8-inch 4-layer cake, and stay tuned all the way through because at the end I'm going to give you some tips on how to scale up and scale down if you have different sized tins. So that is really vital because I get asked that a lot. But for now I'm going to get on with making the sponge. Now obviously if you have watched my videos before you'll know that my cupcake recipe most often is an all-in-one method, which means that I put all my ingredients in apart from like the milk and beat it all together at the same time. Whereas with the bigger cakes and the layer cakes, I tend to use a creaming method. And what a creaming method is where you beat the sugar and the butter together, you cream them together, and then you add all the rest of the ingredients in stages. And what that does is it creates lots of air so that you don't need to rely on the raising agents. And it makes a super duper light, fluffy, tasty sponge. So, without further ado, into my mixing bowl, I'm going to put 500 grams of caster sugar. Now, I also often get asked if you can't find caster sugar, what should you use? Now, I would always recommend using caster sugar. Sometimes it's called baking sugar or cake sugar. It's basically the finest sugar before you get to icing sugar or confectioner sugar, which is more powdery. This sugar is a really, really fine crystal, much finer than, say, granulated sugar, which means that it's not going to take too much to dissolve it. And it's going to make a lighter sponge than, say, granulated sugar, which will end up being quite heavy because you might not dissolve all the sugar. Any hoodles, next I'm going to put in an equal amount, so 500 grams of soft unsalted butter. And if you don't know what soft unsalted butter is, it should be squeezably soft. I'm finding it hard to get into my hand, there's so much. It should be squeezably soft, and I went through this in quite some detail in my cupcake masterclass. You should be able to squeeze it and for it to not be greasy and oily, but to leave indentations where your fingers went. So this is just right. Now I'm using a freestanding mixer. I am very lucky to have lots of these here in the bakery, and hopefully you guys are lucky enough to have one at home. If you don't have one of these, you can use an electric hand mixer or you can use a wooden spoon in a bowl, but you are going to need some serious guns because it's going to take quite a long time to get it to the right consistency. But if you do that, please let me know in the comments box below how long it took and how it turned out because I am very curious. But any hoodles, I'm going to beat this together using my paddle attachment. I had a question the other day about somebody who didn't have the paddle attachment and just had a whisk. I would recommend trying to find a paddle because whisks may put too much air into it. Obviously you do want a lot of air, but whisks are designed to put the most air possible in, so it might be just a little bit overkill. Anywho, I'm going to put that onto a medium speed. And it's going to start breaking the butter up and eventually it will all come together to be one. And then I want to leave that beating for at least 5 minutes, and it's going to go really, really pale and fluffy. Now while that's mixing, I thought I would show you and tell you what happens when you don't do this bit, when you just kind of put the eggs in, mix them about a little bit, and then continue with the rest of the ingredients. This cake here I did by doing just that. I mixed the butter and the sugar together for maybe like a minute, not that long at all, and then added all the rest of the ingredients. And as you can see, it looks okay, right? And the fact is that I'm going to be using self-raising flour, which does have some raising agent in it. And so this has actually risen up quite nicely. But I can tell from experience that this is a dry cake. And if you look inside, it's very yellow, very crumbly. And I'm going to eat some and tell you what it's like. Let's have a little taste. It's also got some very big air pockets. And it's really dry. It looks nice, but it's dry. Which isn't what you want. And that's because the sugar, stuck in my throat. The sugar hasn't really had a chance to dissolve, and so there's still, granules of sugar in there. It just hasn't got into the mix, and therefore it's dried out super quick. It's just not a very nice cake. It also tastes a lot sweeter than it normally would, so not a fan. Right, that's had about 5 minutes. As you can see, it is really super pale, way more pale than it was when it started. Let's have a closer look. Mmm, fluffy. So that's now ready to take the eggs. So put it back on the mixer. And with the eggs, as you know, I always use large eggs, and I will always use free-range eggs. If you can get hold of organic free-range eggs, that is the best kind of egg to get. Not only is the egg just better tasting and much better quality, the hens would have had a much happier life. So, I have 8 of them. I'm going to add them 2 at a time. If you were making a smaller cake or a smaller batch of cake, you would maybe add them 1 at a time, but you know, life's a bit too short to do 8 single cakes, one after the other. So 2 at a time will work just fine. I'm going to crack them into a bowl first. And then pop them in and get the mixer going on a low speed to start with, just to break them in, and then speed it up. And these will want to be beat together for another couple of minutes, beating it really, really well to combine it. So it's going to take a little bit of time, guys. Sorry. Now the reason we add them 1 at a time or 2 at a time, or just not all at once, is just because we want to create as much air as possible. So this is constantly beating air into the mixture, which is going to give us a much nicer, lighter cake. So when the last eggs have combined, you can add the next eggs and do the same thing. Now, if you are doing this by hand, you might find that your eggs are curdling the mixture. Which is actually not a massive problem, but if that does happen, you can add a tablespoon of your dry ingredients, which is the flour. We never do that here because we don't find it makes much of a difference, but doing it by hand, that might happen more. My last eggs. Now, I mentioned earlier that I use a self-raising flour rather than plain flour for the floury element. And I do get some questions about this. Why am I using self-raising flour when we're creating so much air? The real reason is that I've tried it with both, and plain flour tends to make a bit more of a denser cake, and the self-raising flour just has a little bit of a lift, which I really like. If by all means use plain flour if that's all you've got, or you can't get hold of self-raising flour, it's not going to make much difference, but it will make a slight textural difference, which I prefer. So anyway, I reckon this is good to go. So I have already sifted my self-raising flour, and I also have 500 grams of that. I'm going to start putting it in. Now I'm going to be using the lowest speed on my mixer to fold this in, because I don't want to shock this batter with this dumping of some flour in and lose all that lovely air, and I'll show you what happens when you don't do that in a minute. But if you haven't got a big nice mixer like this, or even if you're using a hand mixer, don't forget the international symbol, I do recommend using a metal spoon to do this bit, or a spatula, just something that you can cut through the mixture and fold it in. It'll just make your cake keep nice and light, but for now I'm going to put this on the lowest speed. So when this is just almost completely combined, you can then add your final ingredients, which are 6 tablespoons of milk with a teaspoon of vanilla extract mixed in, and just add that and fold it in. And then I normally finish the folding by hand, just to make sure that all the bits at the bottom of the mixing bowl have made it into the gang. So obviously if you're doing this by hand, that's not a problem at all, because you're already doing it by hand. So let's just have a little scrape. So it looks super light and fluffy and nice and smooth. Unlike the batter that I made to make this cake, this little abomination here next to me, which I did by, rather than folding the flour in, I just dumped it in and beat it at the same speed that I'd been beating my eggs and my butter and all that jazz. And as you can see, It is minging. It's really, really thin and floppy and damp and really dense. It's just got nothing about it that I want to be getting involved with. So yeah, not into that cake at all. Goodbye. So now I'm gonna get on with making my perfect cake. So I've got my 4 8-inch sandwich tins. I'm using loose bottom sandwich tins, but by all means use springform or not loose bottom sandwich tins. I think they're just called sandwich tins. And evenly distribute your batter. Now if you want to measure this and do it with your scales, by all means do. I'm fully supportive of that. Always supporting your use of scales, but I'm just going to estimate it. And just to give it a little help leveling out in the oven, I'm going to use a palette knife just to smooth the tops. Now it's time to bake. So I've had my oven preheating at 170 degrees C. It's a fan assisted oven. And I'm going to bake these for about 22 to 25 minutes. And there's a few rules with these cakes. You don't want to open the oven door any earlier than 22 minutes because the oven door opening will suck a lot of the air out, meaning that the temperature will change inside and you could end up with deflated cakes, and you don't want that. When the 22 minutes is up, I would check them on the top first for spring back, or use a skewer, but use the skewer and the test in all 4 of the layers because your oven may be slightly different temperature at the back or the top and the bottom and the front. So you want to make sure that they're all evenly cooked. And just add extra minutes or 2 minutes at a time. Do add them with a timer though. Don't just go, oh, I'll remember, because I've made that mistake many times and I forget. My cakes are out of the oven and they're smelling amazing and they're pretty hot right now. So I'm going to let those cool down and show you what they look like in a little bit. But earlier on I promised you a good way of upscaling and downscaling your recipe because I'm aware that not everyone has the 8-inch tins that I'm using. You might have slightly different sizes. And there is quite an easy rule of thumb to use when you're scaling up and scaling down. Obviously the recipe that I've given you is for 4 layers of 8-inch cakes, and that started with 500 grams of all my ingredients plus 8 eggs, which is also 500 grams. So when you reduce by 2 inches your tin size, say let's go down to 6 inches, you reduce all your ingredients by 250 grams. So you're going to have 250 grams of self-raising flour, butter, sugar, and 4 large eggs. If we go the other way, up to 10 inches, you're going to add 250 grams. So we're going to have 750 grams of all the ingredients plus 12 eggs, and so on and so on. Obviously, now we're into the realms of ridiculously large tins, so you're going to have to work that out yourself. But hopefully that's a nice, easy way of doing it. Now I'm just going to let these guys cool down. Hey there, hi there, ho there. It's crumb inspection time. So my cakes are nice and cool, and I am going to cut a slice out of them and show you what it looks like. Whoa. Would you look at that? That is an absolutely delicious looking cake. So what we've got here is a really light crumb. It's springing back really nicely when I squeeze it. It's super soft and fluffy, and I guarantee that it's going to taste amazing. Let's have a look though, just to make sure. Yum. So unlike the other one that I tasted earlier, because the sugar's all really nicely dissolved, it's the same amount of sugar, but for some reason it just tastes a lot less sweet than the other one. It's got a really nice crumb. It doesn't just stick in a ball in my throat, which is lovely. That is the perfect, lightest, fluffiest vanilla sponge. And as I promised you earlier, I am also going to give you some good tips on how to adapt them to be different flavours. So you might have noticed I've got these very pretty little cakes next to me. I've got a lemon cake and a chocolate cake. And these are using the same base recipe that I used for this vanilla cake, but I just have switched a couple of things up. So for the lemon one, for example, I added the zest of 8 lemons. So with lemon flavouring, you want to add the zest of the same amount of lemons as you have eggs. So obviously 8 lemons is quite a lot, but also I used 6 tablespoons of lemon juice rather than milk and added that in at the end in the normal way, and this is the result, and it is really tasty. And then the chocolate one, I replaced about 70 grams of the flour with 70 grams of good quality cocoa powder, and I sifted those together right at the beginning so that they were all really well combined, and then just proceeded as normal, used milk at the end, and this is the result. And I think it's probably a good idea that we just take a slice out of these two just to check them out. That is my masterclass on how to create the perfect fluffy sponge and to adapt it and to upscale it and downscale it and all those things. So I hope you enjoyed that. Please do let me know how you get on in the comments box, and don't forget that I'll be doing a meet and greet at the Crumbs and Doily shop in Soho on Sunday the 4th of August from 12 until 4, so please come along. You can get things like this there, as well as seeing me. This might even be better than seeing me, to be honest. But anyway, I do hope you come along. It'll be at the Crumbs and Doily shop, so I will see you there hopefully, but I'll be back in the meantime with some other videos, so check those out as well. Meantime, I'm going to eat these.